everyone, this is Amy from the Helms Academy, and today we're doing a Writing and Reading Club recap from our Types of Literature lesson on June 16th. So why do we even care about these types of literature that are on the GED or the HiSET or the TASC tests? Well, we're doing this lesson because if you can identify what type of literature you're reading while doing a reading test, it gives you some strategies for how you want to approach that reading and the questions around it, what kind of information you might be looking for. So that way you're not wasting time reading through it and then trying to go back and identify information. While you're going through, you'll know some of the key features of it and you'll be able to pull out those features as you're reading. Be able to apply them more quickly to the questions and have better reference for where to look back when you go back to check the text. Okay, so a couple important terms to start with. We want to talk today about both fiction and nonfiction readings. So a fiction reading would be something that is not real, it's a made-up story, and nonfiction is true. Then we have our three reasons that people primarily write something, and that's to inform, persuade, or entertain. Someone might be just informing you about something. I always like to think of this as, if you read an article about what a zebra is or some sort of animal, it's just going to give you facts. Here's what they look like. This is what they eat. That is an informative article. Now, if I were writing an article about whether to get a pet horse or a pet donkey, that would be a persuasive article because I'm going to be making an argument about which one is better. Now, if I were trying to entertain you, I might tell you a story about a talking zebra, horse, and donkey and some adventure that they went on, right? That's my only purpose, is for entertainment. So these are three ways that people might be using the text that you're reading, and it's important to keep those in your mind as well because it tells you a little bit, again, about what kind of content you're tackling in the test. All right, so as far as types of literature, we're going to talk about these types today. They're short stories, which could be fiction or nonfiction, right? We could tell a story that happened in our own lives, and that's a nonfiction story. Or we can make up a story about some kind of adventure. That'd be a fiction story. Nonfiction informative would be, facts about a specific thing that is like it could be a building, it could be an animal, it could be a person. Its job is just to inform you about that topic. Nonfiction historical is about a specific historical event. So it's not fiction. It's not making up a story that's based in history. It is a completely true story about some historical event or time period. Nonfiction persuasive is something that's trying to convince you one way or another. And it's not a story about whether you should believe one way or another. Like maybe you think of children's stories, right? We have these children's stories that have strong morals, something you're supposed to learn from them. It's supposed to persuade you to act a certain way. It's not like that. What the kind of text you'll see here is a persuasive text that's trying to get you to believe one way or another on a specific question or topic. And then you might also see poetry, which is one of the easiest ones to identify just based on its form. So let's take a look at more detail. How do we know when something is a short story? Well, you can look for example, dialogue. You can look for characters. So dialogue is the conversation between two or more people. It's often in quotation marks, so it tends to be easy to identify in a text. Characters are the people or different entities that are acting in the story. A lot of times when it's a short story, you'll get a description of the setting, right? You'll see a lot more about the beautiful landscape and what kinds of buildings and other things that you might see in where this story takes place or the time in which it takes place. And that's not something you often see in other types of writing. And then you'll also see narration. So someone's telling the events that are happening. And it might be someone in the story, or it might be someone that has like a snow globe view of the story, looking at it and saying, oh, this person goes there and that person does this. That's narration. So the questions to ask while you're reading, if you see, oh, okay, this is definitely a short story, I know what to do now, you're going to ask yourself, okay, who are the main characters? Because you're definitely going to need to know the characters for the questions that you'll have to answer. And you'll have to ask yourself, what is the story about? What are they trying to accomplish in the story, or what is the, oftentimes there's some sort of big thing that they're trying to overcome in the story. So identify that. What is that? For test taking tips, I would recommend read the whole passage. Don't just skim it, because with stories, every line can be really important. So I encourage you to read it through carefully one time, check the questions, and then take the time to go back and double check the things that you learned from that first time through. So this is an example. This is from the HiSET practice test online. You can see here that this automatically tells us at the beginning a little bit of information about it, and you'll see it's a historical novel. Well, a novel is a story, right? It's like a chapter book. And we also see the word excerpt, and excerpt means that it's just taken out of a larger text. So when it says excerpt from the Jonah Man is the larger text there. Now on here, right away, I can identify it because I see a lot of dialogue. Do you see where it says in the middle there, "No, sir," I said, "No, sir," he said in mock surprise? That's a conversation. So right away, I'm gonna go, oh, I know what I'm getting into here. This is a story. Okay, so our next question, how do we know if it's nonfiction, informative, or historical? And I put these together because they have a lot of similarities. So here are some things to look for. This is a text about one topic, and it gives lots of details on that topic. You're going to see a lot of important names of people, places, and other things related to the topic. If it's historical, you'll specifically see a lot of dates and events, like almost like a timeline, and you might see something that's easy to look for are maybe years or day, month, or times that document throughout. So you'll be able to kind of create a timeline out of that information. And if it's informative, you'll most likely see a number of definitions and descriptions of key terms. So when you've identified that you have this kind of nonfiction, informative, or historical text, you want to ask, what does the text want me to learn about, right? That's the key thing, making sure you have the topic in mind. What are the key facts about this text? And what do the questions want me to answer about this text? And then while you're taking the test, I would encourage you to actually skip over, if you see that it's informative or historical, if you're short on time, I'd encourage you to skip over it, read the questions first so that you know what you're looking for, and then come back to the text. And if you can get the answers by skimming and scanning, that's great. Or you can at least read through the text with all the questions in mind. So here's an example. This one's called Pencil Towers. It's also from that same practice HiSET test online. And right away, I look at it and say, okay, pencil towers, and I look for some of the keywords, right? So we're talking about New York City, I see Hong Kong, I see Manhattan. That's all just in that first paragraph, just from looking it over quickly. I see skinny scrapers, which makes me think of skyscrapers, right? And that helps me to be able to piece together, okay, I think we're talking about skyscrapers here. And when I start skimming through here, I see places, I see how tall things are, I see information about what's included on these towers. There's this looks informative to me. All right, so and the next type is, how do we know something is persuasive? Well, if it's persuasive, it's going to be trying to convince you of a certain argument. So you'll see them trying to make the point that one specific point is the right way. So some questions to ask. What does the author believe about this topic, right? So if it's whatever the topic is, they're going to have an opinion one way or the other about that topic. That's the whole point of the persuasive text. And how does the author support this belief, and what evidence does the author have? So the bulk of the reading is going to be, okay, here's the argument I'm making, but here are the reasons why I believe it. So some test taking tips. I want you to read through this article once before you get to the questions, because you need to get a full idea of what the person's argument is. Then you can always go back and skim and scan for the answers. And I also want you to make sure that you have clearly in your mind the argument of the author. It's almost guaranteed that the test is going to ask you something along those lines about the text. So here's an example, right? And honestly, I can tell right away from the title that this is going to be a persuasive piece, because it says, do we still need skyscrapers? Okay, so right away we're asking a question, right? And that person either is going to answer us yes or no and tell us why. So this is a persuasive text, and it goes on past what you see on the screen here. But you can access all of this by looking at that free practice test on the HiSET's website. All right, our last one is, how do we know it's poetry? Well, poetry is so easy to identify, right? It looks so different from an essay. It's usually more narrow, it's usually short lines with stanzas. So some questions to ask is, you need to be thinking about, what does the author mean, not just what does the author say. Oftentimes there are hidden meanings in poetry. It's not just about what the words are on the page, but the meaning and feeling behind them. That's what makes poetry so challenging. Of course, it's very short, it's often easy to read through quickly, but really understanding that deeper meaning can be a challenge. So here's a couple of test-taking tips. Read the poem multiple times and break it down line by line and stanza by stanza. And try to decode some of that figurative language that's in there. That will help you to figure out what is the most important thing to understand from this, and how is the author using normal language, everyday language, to help us understand an even bigger concept. So here's an example of a poem, right? And this immediately, again, I can recognize it by the way that it's structured. So when you see a poem, read through it thoroughly 1 or 2 times, and then come back and answer the questions. Thank you so much for joining me today for this Helms Academy Writing Club recap. You can follow us below by subscribing to our YouTube channel, and you can also check us out on Facebook, on Instagram, and at helmsacademy.org.